Hi, I'm Emily Crawford, and I'm here at Udvar Hazy with Dr. Neal. Dr. Neal, what's your job at the Space Center?
I am a space historian in our Division of Space History, and I'm a curator for the Space Shuttle here in the museum, the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum.
Okay, do you agree with NASA's budget and how it distributes its funding? It seems to be leaning to distributing more money towards space technology according to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration fiscal year 2012.
I'd like to play with your question a little bit before we get to your exact wording and say that as a historian, I tend to look at not a particular year's budget, but at the trends in budget from year to year and look at what's changing. Because what changes in the budget says something about how NASA is changing and also how our society's values are changing, or at least our political values are changing. So for me as a historian, it's kind of less important what a given year's budget is as to how that budget looks in comparison to previous years or how it's projected out to the future.
Okay.
So in the current budget, as I look at that in comparison to NASA's historical budgets, I see some changes. And I see some things that are staying pretty much the same, and they're projected to stay the same. And the budget that we have right now before us as NASA's current budget indicates a decrease in the amount of funds going to human spaceflight, and that's because the shuttle isn't flying anymore, and an increase, as you said, in funding for new technology. That's a really important change because NASA is on the cusp of deciding what else to do in space and how to do things differently in space. And they will not make that progress without investing in new technology. So at least for a couple of years, there's going to be a shift in that direction. Once they find through the research they do that they have a new vehicle concept in mind, then there'll probably be a shift back toward more operational funding to actually carry out space flight. I think it's very important that right now there is an increase in funding to develop new technologies. The shuttle was tried and true in Earth orbit, but it's no good for going to the moon or to Mars or to an asteroid. There's no spacecraft on Earth yet ready to do that. And so the only way to get there, if that is the goal, is to invest in new technology development.
And that leads to our next question. So where do you think that NASA should go from here?
I really do think that it should be investing in research and innovation. NASA has always excelled when it is involved in innovation. Whether it was in the 1960s coming up with the very first spacecraft the United States had ever seen, much less imagined, to developing a spacecraft that looked like an airplane, the space shuttle. And it's time to have another innovation, another breakthrough to make spaceflight less expensive, less dangerous, more routine. So it seems to me that if they want to stay vital as an agency, they need to stay creative. And the way to stay creative is to put money into research and development and to try to find those new breakthroughs.
So do you agree with the decision to cancel the 2020 mission to the moon?
Here again, as a historian, kind of looking at the whole context for that decision, my judgment is that the early decision to try to go to the moon again was made rather prematurely before there was a well thought out rationale for why to do it. There are some good arguments to go back to the moon. There are some arguments that are not as persuasive. There are proponents out there for going to an asteroid first because there's more practical value to be learned from an asteroid in their view, even though an asteroid isn't really a place where you could set up a base camp and live. And then there are others who would say, let's go all out, let's go to Mars. You know, we've been to the moon. And those arguments hadn't all been debated and played out. The moon was kind of an easy target to pick. And I think whenever the United States is going to make a commitment to a major project like that, all the points of view need to be aired and the best decision made. I think it was the early adoption of that as a goal was more of a symbolic gesture, a way to say, we're going to do something bold in space. But they really didn't have the political support and the infrastructure in place for that to be a sustainable goal. So I think there was merit in canceling that until it's all better thought out. And maybe the decision will be not to go to the moon. It may be to go somewhere else.
Hi, I'm Christina Lee, and I'm here with Dr. Valerie Neal, and Emily did a great job discussing the budget with Dr. Neal. And now I want to take a look at the scientific aspects of it. So, Dr. Neal, in your opinion, are the expenses in counteracting microgravity, maintaining nutrition, and oxygen recycling worth the cost of sending a manned mission into space?
That's really a good question, because the dominant critique of human spaceflight is that it does cost more than sending robotic explorers into space. You don't have to feed them, you don't have to rest them, you really don't have to protect them from the hazards of spaceflight. They're pretty rugged. But they are not as versatile as human beings. And because of that, I think the stronger argument is that it's worthwhile sending humans into space for at least some of the goals that we want to accomplish there. And really the ideal situation is to have a mix or a balance of humans in space and robots or machines in space. The machines are wonderful as scouts for humans, or even as surrogates for humans, because they can go places where it's too dangerous or far too expensive to send humans. It will be not in our lifetimes probably that humans will venture out to Jupiter or Saturn or beyond, like the Voyager spacecraft and some of those that followed. On the other hand, it will probably be not in our lifetime that robots could go to the moon or Mars and do as readily the things that a human being can do, and with the kind of intelligence that humans bring to the situation. So for doing the scouting work, doing some of the tedious work, doing some of the most dangerous work, I would vote for the machines, whether they are robots as we typically think of robots, or whether they are telescopes and other devices that exceed our capacities to collect information. But for doing research in space, for doing tasks that involve fine motor coordination, for being able to make decisions, to adapt to circumstances and gain more from the experience than whatever the plan was, for that I would vote for humans. Mm-hmm. And I've been involved on the fringes of spaceflight now since 1980 for about 30 years, and I've had a chance to see what both can do. And I think it really is not an either or, it's a both and situation. And for doing certain things, it's definitely worth the expense and the added trouble of feeding and caring for humans in space to get the value of the human presence there. There's no substitute for human beings yet when it comes to intelligence and reasoning.
It's very true. Do you think that the research into dark matter and energy can help find a new energy source, or the source of the creation of the universe?
I don't know about finding a new energy source in the sense of a practical application, maybe to solve energy problems here on Earth. I have no idea if there's any correlation between dark energy in the cosmos and the energy here on Earth, but I do think that dark energy probably holds the key to a lot of the unanswered questions about what powers the universe and what its history is. And it probably also will open up some new realm of science that we haven't been smart enough to think of yet, in the same way that Einstein's work essentially opened up the field of quantum physics. If more can be learned about this presence in the universe that isn't yet visible but can be sensed, it should answer a lot of questions about what the nature of the universe really is and what its history has been. Whether it will take us all the way back to the creation of the universe, who knows? But all the knowledge that's being gained through all of the telescopes that are peering into the universe is giving us better and better understanding of it. And it really is an amazing and mysterious place.
Yeah, there's so much to be learned from space. There's just like endless possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neal, for coming to talk to us.
Well, you're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
No
Or an executive summary. So I look at the words to see what are the main themes that are attached to that budget. What is NASA telling the American public that they're going to try to accomplish? Or what is the President and the Congress telling NASA that they want it to do? And there are kind of slogans that appear in the words, and they change from time to time. In the 1990s, the NASA budget was couched in terms of a balanced space program, and it was going to be a mission to planet Earth and a mission from planet Earth. And they even had pictures of a balanced scale with the to and the from Earth on both sides of the balance. This time they're talking about a sustainable, affordable space program, and sustainability is all part of this whole environmental consciousness and energy consciousness. So now it's being applied to the agency as a whole, and so it reflects our times. And a couple of years from now, there'll be some different slogans or catchphrases. And in theory, those slogans should match up to the numbers, and the numbers should support what the slogan is. So in the current environment, NASA's talking about innovation, reinvigoration. They're talking about education for the future workforce. It's clear that this is a very future-oriented budget, and they're trying to lay the foundations now for what may be another flowering of human spaceflight, the way the 1980s were a real flowering when the shuttle came into being. I think that for a few years, it's likely that the NASA budget is going to stay pretty much as it is now, unless there's a major change as a result of next year's elections. And that remains to be seen. The other thing about the NASA budget is very interesting, and that is that for about 50 years, the budget has been very steady in the bigger picture of national spending. It seems to me that the American public and our American political system are willing to support a modest space program. And it's been at about, a nickel. At its highest point in the 1960s, it was about a nickel of every dollar that the government spent went to space. Ever since about 1968, it's been about a penny of every dollar that is the government spends in the space program. And that doesn't even show up on most national budget charts. So people have a perception that the space program is really costly, that it's a big part of the U.S. budget, and it isn't at all. And they're usually shocked to find out that it's about 1% of federal spending. And then you look at everything that has been accomplished with that 1 penny of every dollar, and it's pretty remarkable how well they have stretched the funds to send all these explorers out to the planets, to improve aviation here on Earth, to put scientific research and scientists up into space, to operate a space shuttle, a fleet of shuttles for 30 years. It's a pretty good value for the amount of money spent.
Yeah, I was impressed with, I had never heard of flagship technology or ion propulsion until I started this project. I didn't know they were working on so many different technologies for alternate travel.
And they have been all along, and some of them prove out, some of them prove too hard. The technology that's needed doesn't exist yet. And so that's part of research. You know, you go down a path, and sometimes that path does break through a barrier, and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, then you have to scale back and regroup and try a different path. And some of the technology endeavors that were started in the 1980s and 90s and didn't pan out then may yet come around again when some other technology is a little bit farther advanced. But I think that the fact that there is this continuing low-level but constant support for the space program indicates that in Americans' eyes, this is part of our national life. This is something that our nation should do. In the current environment, no one has the real energy to adopt another major program like a colony on the moon or on Mars. But nobody wants the United States not to be in space at all. And so these things tend to ebb and flow. Our spending in space and NASA's budget is very much part of what else is going on in the country at the same time and what the pressures are. And so I think that's why as a historian I'm always looking at what has it been like 5 years in the past, 10 years in the past, what's the trend line? And after that peak in the 1960s, when we were really pressing to go to the moon, there's been a nice steady line. And my hope would be that that will continue indefinitely. If it doesn't go up, I hope it at least continues. Because it does seem to me that on many levels in our political culture and in our popular culture, we see ourselves as spacefarers.
All right.
Okay.